Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Accurate podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Wednesday, the 13th of November in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, Donald Trump picks Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy to lead a new Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE for short.
The Fed's Kashkari weighs in on today's US inflation data as warnings grow over the impact of Trump's proposed policies.
Plus, we have a special report on Europe's biggest lithium mine and why Rio Tinto's $2.7 billion bet in Serbia is now running into a geopolitical fight.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
The world's richest person, Elon Musk, will join entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy leading a new US Department of Government Efficiency in Donald Trump's administration. Trump says the two men will be tasked with dismantling government bureaucracy, slashing regulations, cutting spending and restructuring federal agencies. Here's Bloomberg's John Harney.
It's a little bit unclear as yet how this would work out. Musk, who of course is the world's wealthiest man and has many government contracts, might come into the administration as sort of somebody who was in there temporarily, almost like an informal designation. But much has to be worked out.
At a pre-election Trump rally, Musk predicted he could cut at least $2 trillion from the US federal budget. That would be almost a third of the $6.75 trillion the government spent in the last fiscal year. More than $5 trillion of that came from social security, healthcare, defence and veterans benefits. In a post on X, Musk suggested the Department of Government Efficiency, which abbreviates to DOGE, would offer merchandise. Musk already runs a host of companies, including Tesla and SpaceX. Bloomberg's Billionaires Index calculates his net worth at close to $320 billion.
Musk and Ramaswamy's appointments come as Trump continues to firm up his top team. The president-elect nominated Fox News host Pete Hegseth to be his defense secretary and Mike Waltz to be his national security advisor. Heyman Capital Management CIO Kyle Bass told Bloomberg that Trump's choices look to be much tougher on China.
I would just call them China realists. I mean, Xi Jinping has been telling you what he's going to do since 2017 in every public speech, every public appearance he's made, and every meeting he's had with U.S. officials. So when we start realizing that China is not our friend, and if you read the Director of National Intelligence's annual threat assessment report to Congress, in no uncertain words do we say China is the largest threat to U.S. national security. So I think it's important to note that our leadership has done a poor job in explaining to the American public what kind of threat China actually presents.
Bass added that he expects Trump's aides to take a tougher stance on Putin and Ukraine than Democrats believe. Republicans are closing in on control of the House of Representatives with 216 seats against the Democrats' 207 seats, with 12 races left to declare. 218 seats are needed for a majority in the US House of Representatives.
Minneapolis Fed President Neel Kashkari says he'll be watching the inflation data closely to determine whether a December interest rate cut is appropriate. Traders are now pricing in about 2 US rate cuts by June versus almost 4 seen at the start of last week. Kashkari was speaking at the Yahoo Finance Invest conference.
It'd be hard to imagine the labor market really heats up between now and December. There's just not that much time. I think there'd have to be a surprise on the inflation front to change the outlook so dramatically. The bigger question long run is, where are we going to settle? What does neutral represent? One big surprise over the past couple of years, if the economy has been more resilient than I expected in the face of this high policy rate, how do you answer that question? Why has that been the case?
Kashkari's comments come ahead of that US inflation data due today at 1:30 p.m. London time. A Bloomberg survey of economists sees the consumer price index rising by 0.2% in October, with the core index rising by 0.3%. Ahead of that, traders have been increasing bets for further losses in the Treasury market on expectations that Donald Trump's policies will rekindle inflation and keep interest rates higher.
Now to Europe. Germany's Olaf Scholz is asking his country for another chance at power. The Chancellor will make a public address to the nation later today after setting a date in February for an early election. His main opposition, the Christian Democrat Union's Friedrich Merz, told the media he had agreed to that date.
I don't want to make a secret of the fact that I could have imagined the whole procedure taking place earlier. Basically, with this delay, which the Federal Chancellor even wanted to extend into January, we are losing around a month for the election to the next German Bundestag, and therefore also for the formation of the government after the next election. But I think this is justifiable.
That was Merz there speaking via a translator. Polls suggest that he is the frontrunner to be the next leader of Europe's largest economy. Scholz's support plunged to a record low as growth stagnates in Germany and his government has been attacked for its approach to migration.
The Bank of France is predicting zero growth for its economy for the rest of the year. If the central bank is right, it would be the first quarter with no growth in nearly 3 years. The forecast is based on business activity being put off by the country's fractious political situation. Poor growth is likely to compound the government's fiscal woes in France, where it's struggling to implement a programme of austerity.
More expensive business class flights, levies on stock and bond trades, and a $5 a tonne tax on fossil fuel emissions. Those are just some of the ideas being pitched at the COP29 climate summit in Baku to raise the vast sums needed to battle climate change. However, the president of the World Bank, Ajay Banga, says that there needs to be more of a focus on the business opportunities within the climate industry.
People think that there's a silver bullet to be fired in all this. Don't think like that. Think about it as a series of things to be done with the private sector, which over time changes their thinking about this area. It's not that they don't want to invest. If there is a business reason to take their money to a country, they will. But they're not going to take it there just because somehow we think it's the right thing for them to do it. We've got to allow them to see the opportunity.
The comments from the president of the World Bank come as negotiators from almost 200 countries continue to work on a new goal for developed nations to provide climate finance for emerging economies.
Apple is preparing to unveil a new wall-mounted tablet as it works to catch up with rivals in the smart home market. Bloomberg understands that the AI-enabled product, codenamed J490, will be the size of 2 iPhones side by side with the ability to control appliances and handle video conferencing. Bloomberg's Mark Gurman says the company is gearing up to announce the device as early as March and will position it as a command centre for the home.
It'll have FaceTime, it'll have audio and video intercoms for use across your home. If you have multiple things like this, you'll be able to tap into Apple Music to control the music playback on your speakers throughout the home. So it's basically a command center for everything you might want to do in your house, anything you might want to control in your house. There's going to be a home security element to it, a content consumption element to it. And this is something that can drive Apple hardware sales, but also Apple services sales, and sets the stage for further entrance from Apple into the home.
Mark Gurman says CEO Tim Cook is betting that the product can make the company a force in the sector, which is currently dominated by rivals Alphabet and Amazon.
And those are your top stories. Now, thinking about the markets this morning, Asian stocks are down at their lowest level in almost 2 months. Concerns are beginning to mount in the equity space around US President-elect Donald Trump's proposed tariffs and his picks for key administration jobs. You've seen this morning the Japanese yen weaken to 155 versus the dollar, which raises the risks of intervention. Also overnight, we've seen the S&P 500 stock futures dipping down 0.2%. US stocks 50 futures also down 0.4%. Asian stocks really struggling. Of course, yesterday we saw a big rise in Treasury yields, which seemed to take the steam out of the equity rally. 10-year US Treasury yields rose by 12 basis points. The dollar also rose by 0.5% to a new 2-year high. The S&P 500 500, therefore, on Tuesday closed down 0.3%. And the small cap US stocks also reversed recent gains, and bank stocks lost ground. So those were the big moves yesterday, and they seem to be continuing in the Asian session this morning.
Well, in a moment, we'll bring you more on the latest appointments in the Trump administration, plus dig into why a lithium mine project in Serbia has become a major political controversy. But another story that caught our eye today, we're talking about the major jump in Bitcoin's price, of course, since the US election result. And our colleagues have been writing about how those who work in the crypto industry are working around the clock to keep up with the surge in demand. The records, of course, piling up for crypto tokens, Bitcoin marching towards $100,000, or at least that's some of the talk in the market as well. So that means that even though in an industry that's perhaps sometimes known for its successes, some people are being a little bit wary. There was a trader who's quoted saying he's not buying his Aston Martin just yet.
Yes.
While another was complaining about the fact that he'd no time to go to the gym because he was having to work so hard as well. Massive amounts of money being poured into crypto.
Yeah, absolutely. But I will just point to the fact that there is at least a bit of steam coming out of that trade this morning. We're down by 1.7% for Bitcoin in dollar terms. So we're trading below $87,000 for Bitcoin. But yes, many, talking about whether we'll get to that $100,000 or not, we shall see.
Well, let's turn to the latest news on who's joining the Trump administration. As we've been telling you, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are going to head up the Department for Government Efficiency. In addition, Fox News host and National Guard officer Pete Hegseth has been picked as Defence Secretary. Our senior editor, Bill Ferries, joins us now for more. Bill, what do we know about what Elon Musk's role is going to be and how he's going to combine it with his many business interests?
Listen, there's not a lot of details on how any of this is going to work, but I think it's most likely going to be some sort of presidential commission that will have a budget, will have a staff. Ramaswamy and Elon Musk will be the heads of it, and their goal is to, I think, identify areas where they see government waste, where they see unnecessary spending, and then try to make recommendations to both the president and really to Congress, which funds all these things, to cut them. President-elect Trump said that he wants the two co-chairs, I guess, here to wrap up their work by July 4th, 2026. He said that would be a present to the United States on what would be the 250th anniversary of American independence. So a lot to be worked out here. In terms of how Musk does it with his companies, I mean, he's not going to become an official government employee in this case, though he will. I mean, presidential commissions call for no conflicts of interest, and Musk, of course, his companies receive billions of dollars in federal contracts, so they will have to thread that needle on that issue.
In terms of what the government, this new department, or as you say, commission, potentially hopes to achieve, it's pretty sweeping. We tried to illustrate that in the figures that we pointed out. Musk talking about slashing $2 trillion from the federal budget, which is a massive chunk of the budget.
Yeah, I mean, they've talked about having a large number of layoffs or firings of federal government employees. $2 trillion, of course, is more than the federal budget for government agencies, including the Pentagon. We're not talking about Social Security and things like that, but it's a massive chunk. I think they'll try to add up those savings over time. So if you saved $100 million from federal spending, and you do that over 2 decades, you start to get some big numbers. But I think it's really unclear where those savings will come from. Every agency has a constituency, not just in terms of jobs, but in terms of members of Congress who will fight to sustain it.
Another key appointment in this last raft of them that we had is the new Defence Secretary, Pete Hegseth, perhaps best known for being a host on Fox News, as well as a National Guard officer. What do we know about him, and what sort of signal does that send to the rest of the world?
We don't know tons. I mean, he is a TV personality on Fox News. He's an Army veteran who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, but he was not a senior officer. He does not have really much experience managing any kind of agency, let alone a place like the Pentagon, which has 2 million men and women in uniform and 770,000 employees. So it will be a real challenge to see if he gets through confirmation how how his leadership goes. I think he fits, the Trump mold in terms of he's a strong proponent of President Trump and the America First agenda. He just doesn't have a lot of experience running a department like the Pentagon. So I think when you look back at who has led this, both under Republican and Democratic presidents over the last decade or two, you're really talking about people who managed thousands or tens of thousands of people, either in the military or in private companies, and so it will be a real challenge. I think there are going to be Republicans who question this appointment going into any kind of confirmation hearing.
Okay, so that on the Pentagon. Also, nominations for several other roles. Any names that stand out that we should pay attention to?
I mean, John Ratcliffe was announced in the last several hours to lead the CIA. He was the final director of national intelligence under Trump. He got that job in 2020. He was a big defender of the president during his first impeachment hearing. I think he's someone who would be seen as a hardliner on China, on a country like Iran. And he's someone who in some ways seems almost like a more traditional pick at this point. He has some relevant experience and would probably get through the confirmation hearing process at this point.
Okay, Bill Ferry's our senior editor. Thank you very much. We're going to Serbia for our next story, where a $2.7 billion project by Rio Tinto to build a lithium mine has triggered protests. But it's also a major political project for President Aleksandar Vučić, who is trying to juggle ties with Russia and China and his plan to move closer to the European Union. Our Prague Bureau Chief Andrea Dudic joins us now for more. Andrea, good morning. This would be the biggest lithium mine in Europe. What are the big objections to the project?
Good morning. Protests over this lithium project have been vast and have brought together a mix of political groups across the political spectrum in the country, as well as environmentalists. They've taken to streets repeatedly over the years with the hope to stop the project, but their main argument is that they think that lithium mining will pollute and destroy the area in Western Serbia once it is up and running.
So how are the protests then affecting the government and also Serbia's president? How are they handling it?
Well, these protests over the lithium projects have been the biggest threat that Aleksandar Vučić has faced during his decade-long rule. And he did take notice of the protests and their impact, because it is something that he does pay attention to. Public discontent is always something that he focuses on. The government that he controls suspended the lithium project in 2022, but after a few years, permits for the projects were reinstated last year, and it's back on track. Still, though, majority of citizens in Serbia oppose the project, and that's one of the reasons why the president himself toured the villages and towns in the area a couple of months ago, trying to convince them, the citizens there, it is of their economic interest for this project to continue, because President Vučić does see the further economic development as key, as something that he focuses on, and we can see impact of his focus already on the ground. If you look at Belgrade these days, it is a city of cranes. Eastern Europe's only high-speed train link between Budapest and Belgrade is being built and finished. And on top of that, the country has recently won its first ever investment rating as S&P lifted bonds out of junk status.
Serbia sits in a very interesting place geopolitically as well. It's a country that has a long time ties to Russia, which of course, is in focus given since the invasion of Ukraine, but it's also a candidate for EU membership. I mean, how is that playing out around this story?
Serbia has played this balancing act for years, and it feels sometimes that President Vučić has brought it to the top. He is trying to keep balancing it between, like you said, the desire to join the European Union and also being close to Russia and China. But things have changed on the geopolitical front, and that can also be seen in Serbia, especially after Russia invaded Ukraine. because while Serbia has not adopted sanctions against Russia like many other countries have, the president has parted ways with Vladimir Putin, hasn't communicated with him for over 2.5 years. And that's a huge change for a leader who was a frequent visitor in Moscow and kept close ties with Vladimir Putin over the years. In this period also, what we've seen is that both Europe and China have increased their investments in Serbia, which has helped to fuel economic growth to about 4%.
Yeah, and so what should we be thinking about sort of going forwards? You've mentioned the sort of support that the projects receive from the EU and the US and the kind of pivotal role of Serbia. What are we thinking about next in this story as you continue to track what's been happening, the protests and the reaction to them?
It seems that the protests will be ignored. The project will continue and the mine will be set up and mining will start in coming years. If that happens, it should create thousands of jobs and boost the nation's exports. Rio Tinto, which is going to operate the mine, is talking about an annual revenue of more than 1 billion euros. And on the political front, it seems that the project actually will bring Serbia closer to Europe because most of the lithium and products related to lithium are going to be bound for Europe, which is trying to face China in the battle for EVs. So we have seen a huge political support that President Vučić has received from European leaders such as German Chancellor Olaf Scholz or European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who have come to Serbia in the last few months to support the project, speak positively about it, and address the publics as well.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.